Every single society on Earth, from the ancient world right up to today, has to deal with the same basic problem. There's just not enough stuff to go around. Our resources are limited, which means we have to make choices. So how do we decide who gets what? That is the big question we're going to tackle in this explainer.
Okay, let's break this down. It really all comes down to three huge economic questions. First, what are we actually going to make? Should we build more electric cars or more public parks? Second, how are we going to make it? Are we talking about a ton of human labor, or are we going to use super advanced robots? And finally, this is the really tricky one. Who actually gets to have all the things we produce? Every single country has to figure this out.
So the way a society answers those three questions, well, that's what we call its economic system. You can almost think of it like the operating system for a country's economy. And today, we're putting two major competing models under the microscope.
First up, we've got the command system, and honestly, the name pretty much says it all. This approach has a very straightforward solution to those big economic questions. You put a central authority, basically the government, in charge of, well, everything.
So what does that look like in practice? Well, in a command system, the government is the main decision maker. It decides what gets made and how much of it. The state usually owns or has tight control over all the major resources. We're talking factories, farmland, you name it. And you can forget about supply and demand determining prices, a central authority just sets them. They even tell entire industries, okay, you need to produce this many tons of steel this year.
The engine that makes this whole thing run is something called central planning. A group of planners literally sits down and tries to draw up a blueprint for the entire economy, deciding where resources should go and what everyone's goals are. The classic historical example, of course, is the Soviet Union. For a more modern one, you could look at North Korea, where the government keeps an incredibly tight grip on the economy.
Now, of course, there are always trade-offs, right? The goal behind this system is often pretty noble. To shrink the gap between rich and poor and make sure everyone gets the basics, like a roof over their head and healthcare. But the reality can be a whole different story. These systems are often wildly inefficient. When there's no competition and no real profit motive, there isn't much reason to get creative or make things better. And this often leads to huge shortages of the stuff people actually want and giant piles of stuff they don't.
All right, now let's flip the coin and look at the other end of the spectrum, the market system. If the command system is all about putting the government in charge, the market system puts individuals and private businesses in the driver's seat.
In this model, all the economic decisions are spread out. It's you, me, and businesses making the choices. Resources, like factories and land, are owned by private citizens. And the price of that new phone or your morning coffee? It's not set by some committee. Nope, it's determined by that constant dance between supply and demand. And the fuel for this entire engine is one thing: competition.
This leads to a really powerful idea called consumer sovereignty. In a market economy, every single dollar you spend is basically a vote. If millions of us suddenly start buying a certain brand of sneakers, we're sending a massive signal to producers that says, hey, make more of this. So in a very real way, it's the consumers who have the ultimate power to decide where society's resources are going to go.
So how does that signal actually get sent? It's through something called the price mechanism, and it's kind of beautiful how it works. Let's say a new video game just explodes in popularity. Demand shoots up. What happens next? Well, the price starts to climb, which is a big flashing sign for game developers that they've got a hit. And that rising price creates this huge incentive for them to make more copies of the game or for other companies to jump in and compete, all chasing those potential profits. No central planner needed at all.
But hey, just like the command system, the market system has its own set of trade-offs. On the one hand, it's incredibly good at allocating resources efficiently and driving innovation. It's amazing at giving people what they want. But on the other hand, it can also create massive gaps between the wealthy and the poor. Plus, some really essential things like, say, national defense or clean air might not be provided by the market on its own. And for some people, even basic needs can become too expensive.
So we've got these two very, very different ways of looking at the economy. Let's put them right next to each other, head to head, to really make the differences pop.
Looking at this chart really makes it crystal clear, doesn't it? When you ask who's making the key decisions, it's government versus individuals and businesses. Who owns the resources? State-controlled versus privately owned. How are prices determined? A central plan versus supply and demand. But I think the most telling difference is the primary goal. The command system is really shooting for economic equality, while the market system is all about economic efficiency.
Okay, so after looking at these two pure, almost theoretical models, you might be asking yourself, all right, but where do countries like the US or Canada or nations in Europe fit in? And that question brings us to the reality of how things actually work in the world.
And here's the big secret. No country on Earth is 100% one or the other. Every single modern economy is actually a mix. The real world is just way more complicated than our simple models.
This chart is a perfect way to visualize this idea of a blend. Think about a country like the United States. It is overwhelmingly a market-based economy, right, with tons of private businesses and consumer choice. But it also has really significant command elements. The government provides public schools, it sets environmental regulations, it funds the military, and it establishes a minimum wage. It's a true hybrid.
And this quote from our source material really just nails the key takeaway here. The reason countries do this, the reason they mix these systems, is that they're trying to find a balance. They want to get all the efficiency and innovation that comes from the market, but also use the government to provide for social well-being and to fix the things the market doesn't do so well on its own.
So, all of this leaves us with the ultimate question, one that economists and politicians are arguing about every single day. What is the perfect balance? How do you weigh economic efficiency against social fairness? There's no easy answer here, and finding that sweet spot on the spectrum between pure command and pure market, well, that's the ongoing challenge for every society out there. What do you think? Where should that balance be?